Hashtag Trending would like to thank Meter for their support in bringing you this podcast. Meter delivers a complete networking stack, wired, wireless, and cellular, in one integrated solution that's built for performance and scale. You can find them at meter.com/HTT. Companies cite AI in 54,800 layoff plans as tech hiring slows. Are wearables finally about to have their moment? New York pushes back on AI content and data centers after industry pushes too far. And Taiwan rejects the idea that 40% of its production could be done in the United States. Welcome to Hashtag Trending. I'm your host, Jim Love. Let's get into it. A new report from Challenger, Gray, and Christmas shows companies have now linked artificial intelligence to at least 55,000 announced layoffs in 2025, as U.S. employers also recorded the lowest January hiring level on record. Layoffs are rising, hiring is stalling, and for workers, especially in tech, the mood has shifted from opportunity to anxiety. Transportation tops the list of jobs lost, but that's driven largely by huge restructurings at UPS. Technology ranks second, ahead of sectors like retail and finance, industries that will also feel AI's impact. It's a reminder that the reality has changed. No one seriously disputes that the tech sector remains the dominant positive driver of U.S. economic growth. But that growth is no longer translating into broad job creation. There was a time when tech companies said they'd simply overhired during the pandemic. That explanation is getting a little out of date. I think what we're seeing now is more structural. The engine of economic growth is running, but it's producing fewer jobs, not more. And that brings us to an obvious question. Is AI really the cause? In some cases, perhaps, but not in the way headlines are suggesting. High-profile announcements like Salesforce's plan to cut 4,000 employees have reinforced an idea that automation is replacing people at a rapid rate. But even inside the industry, there's a growing acknowledgement that much of today's AI-linked layoffs are anticipatory. Many systems simply aren't mature enough yet to replace entire roles. In fact, there are persistent reports that some companies now regret cutting too deeply, too quickly. And that caution is reflected in research from Forrester, which takes a notably pessimistic but grounded view. Forrester is forecasting that AI and automation will directly account for about 6% of U.S. job losses by 2030, roughly 10.4 million jobs. Now that's significant. But it's not an immediate employment collapse. Their more important finding is that nearly 1 in 5 jobs will be reshaped, not eliminated, meaning fewer people, broader roles, and higher expectations. And this is where the pressure is starting to really show up. You can't only look at layoffs. You have to look at the jobs that are not being created. In Canada, for instance, the impact is especially visible among younger workers. According to Statistics Canada, youth unemployment, ages 15 to 24, was about 13.5% in late 2025. Now that's double the overall unemployment rate, which sat about 6.8%. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, notes that the gap between youth and adult unemployment across advanced economies remains about 7 percentage points higher, and it widened in countries like Canada in 2025. At the same time, even where the United States doesn't have that same gap, labor force participation has been shrinking. And that suggests something quieter but just as concerning. People may be leaving the job market altogether. They're no longer counted as unemployed because they've simply stopped looking. That imbalance gives employers leverage. Even without mass automation, companies are increasingly demanding more from existing employees, often citing AI tools as justification. In its most extreme form, this echoes the so-called 996 work philosophy, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, long associated with Chinese and Indian tech firms and publicly defended in the past by people like Jack Ma. While 996 remains controversial and even illegal in some jurisdictions, the fact that U.S. startups are even discussing it says a lot about how tight the labor market has become, especially in tech. Companies have poured extraordinary sums into AI infrastructure, models, and talent. Shareholders are demanding results. Executives are under pressure to show productivity gains now, not 5 years from now. In that environment, layoffs, hiring freezes, and higher workload expectations may become the tools, whether or not AI is actually ready to replace human labor at scale. The tech job market isn't being hollowed out overnight by machines, although some of the things in terms of coding and system development are moving at an astonishing rate. But largely, it's being tightened by uncertainty, investment pressure, and the belief that AI should allow fewer people to do a lot more work. For workers, especially younger ones just trying to get a foot in the door, the distinction doesn't make things easier. It just makes the squeeze harder to escape. Wearables may be getting another serious run. Last week, Meta confirmed that it's cutting staff tied to what remains of its underperforming, dare we say failing, metaverse efforts and redirecting resources towards the growth area they see, wearables. It's a quiet but telling shift away from virtual worlds and towards devices people might actually wear and use. And if the metaverse has left you skeptical about Meta's ability to predict new directions, they're responding to demands for products. But also, at the same time, Apple is once again rumored to be working on a new kind of wearable, possibly a small, AI-driven device designed to be worn on the body rather than held in the hand. Apple hasn't confirmed anything, but the direction is familiar. Apple has a habit of waiting until a technology is usable and then making it desirable. Because this space has seen plenty of hype and plenty of failure. Google's early smart glasses were clunky and socially awkward, spawning the term glass holes. More recently, the Humane AI pin promised a Star Trek-style future, but it ran into hard limits around battery life, performance, and reliability. But the ideas are compelling, and they won't go away. I mean, who doesn't want to tap their chest and talk to a computer like they're on the bridge of the Enterprise? So what's changed this time? Execution and technology. Meta's Ray-Ban smart glasses now look normal and do a few things very well: photos, audio, basic AI, without screaming glass holes. And if Apple enters this space, it will likely follow the Apple Watch playbook. When it launched, critics dismissed it as unnecessary. Now it's a health device, a communication tool, and for many people essential. And it's proof that you can move comic book or science fiction technology into the real world. If you look at the Apple Watch, isn't it from Dick Tracy? Some of you may have to Google that. So, are wearables finally coming in? Maybe. The idea has always been compelling. What's been missing is the ability. People will wear AI if it works fast enough and if the technology stays out of the way. And those pieces may be finally lining up. As federal governments in both the United States and Canada continue to move slowly on artificial intelligence legislation, almost afraid that they'll get in the way of progress, something else is happening beneath the surface. And it's not just that regulators failed to act. It's that much of the tech industry has been pushing perhaps a little too hard, even as complaints were piling up. And nowhere is that result clearer than New York. Lawmakers have introduced two significant pieces of legislation aimed at opposite ends of the AI stack. how AI-generated content reaches the public, and the physical infrastructure that powers AI. On the content side, New York is saying you have to identify AI content, but it goes well beyond simple labeling. It would require disclosure when AI is used in news content and mandate that that material still has to be reviewed or approved by a human editor before publication. Now, that's a direct response to what many see as a flood of low-quality AI-generated material, what critics are calling AI slop, overwhelming feeds, search results, and even legitimate news outlets. And for lawmakers, this isn't theoretical. Constituents are complaining about misinformation, synthetic articles, and automated content systems that scale faster than any newsroom ever could. The message from Albany is blunt. If AI is involved, a human has to be accountable. That's proposal one. The second proposal is even more direct, far less subtle, and could have a huge impact. New York is considering a pause on permits for new data center construction. The electorate is fed up. Electricity rates keep rising, environmental concerns are mounting, neighborhoods are dealing with constant noise, land use battles, and in some cases worries about the water table and other environmental impacts. And all of this is happening while proposed economic benefits, the jobs, the local investment, the long-term tax revenue, often fail to show up in any meaningful way. There was a time when counties and cities were competing aggressively to attract data centers, offering tax breaks, cheap power, and expedited approvals. New York is now taking that logic and flipping it on its head. Instead of asking what incentives it can offer, it's asking whether these facilities are worth the cost at all. To be fair, parts of the industry have tried to respond. Microsoft, for example, recently came up pledging to offset electricity rate increases, improve water and energy efficiency, and tie data center projects more closely to real, measurable job creation. But those promises may be arriving too late. And for the tech industry, their credibility has eroded. And that's the real shift here. This isn't just regulators catching up. It's state and local politicians responding to voters who feel ignored and pushing back in ways that are far more immediate and far more restrictive than anything coming out of Washington or Ottawa. For decades, the tech industry has been the darling of the U.S. and most Western economies. It's powered stock markets, productivity narratives, and innovation stories, and while there's been some pushback in Europe, it's largely resisted regulation in both the United States and Canada. Governments have looked the other way because growth was strong and jobs were plentiful. But that bargain is starting to fray. Tech still fuels markets, but it's no longer fueling the job market. At the same time, the industry largely brushed off criticism about AI-generated junk overwhelming the internet and the real footprint of data centers, and about communities bearing costs without seeing benefits until public resentment has forced politicians to finally pay attention. Analysts like Forrester may be right that AI-driven job losses will unfold gradually. But if layoffs accelerate, if job creation doesn't follow, and if younger workers continue to be shut out, public sentiment won't wait for long-term forecasts to be proven right or wrong. And when voters turn, regulation doesn't arrive gently. It arrives as a blunt force. So New York may not be the end of this story. It may be the beginning of a much harder phase, one where political patience runs out faster than the industry expects. And finally, as the United States tries to pull jobs back, pushing to expand domestic semiconductor manufacturing, Taiwan has drawn a line. Taiwanese officials have rejected claims that as much as 40% of the island's semiconductor capacity could be shifted to U.S. production, calling the idea unrealistic. Instead, Taiwan says any increases in U.S.-based manufacturing will be matched by parallel growth in Taiwan, not a transfer of existing capacity. That distinction matters because Taiwan remains the center of gravity for advanced chip making, particularly through companies like TSMC, which produces the world's most advanced logic chips. There's a practicality in not being able to deliver this 40% figure to the United States. But there's also a strategic reason. The so-called Silicon Dome. It's real. Taiwan's dominance in advanced semiconductors is widely seen as the biggest factor in its security. Until Taipei is confident that the United States would decisively defend Taiwan in a crisis, something that seems deliberately ambiguous at this point, it's unlikely to move a lot of its advanced manufacturing off the island, and it's likely to keep the most advanced chips there. That's the political reality. But there is a practical reality. Chip factories are being announced and built at what feels like lightning speed, although in the U.S., these are supported by subsidies from the CHIPS Act, and the planning's gone back a few years. But even under ideal conditions, these facilities are going to take many more years to move from construction to meaningful production, especially with leading-edge nodes. Even if you get past the construction of the most complex high-tech factories that are required, there's skilled labor, supplier ecosystems, process tuning, and yield optimization that simply cannot be rushed. In that context, the idea that 40% of Taiwan's semiconductor output could simply be moved is a fiction. What's happening instead is incremental capacity expansion, new fabs in new places, while the most advanced processes still remain where the expertise already exists. From Taiwan's perspective, this isn't resistance to cooperation, it's realism. Semiconductors aren't just factories, they're ecosystems built over decades. And that's why the so-called Silicon Dome matters so much. Taiwan's chip dominance functions as a form of mutually assured destruction. In an armed conflict, there are only two plausible outcomes. Neither one of them is good. If China could somehow seize Taiwan's advanced semiconductor capacity intact, it would gain an overwhelming leverage in AI chips and advanced computing. The economy of the world would shift overnight. But if those factories were damaged or destroyed, the result would be just as destabilizing. A sudden collapse in global access to advanced semiconductors, plunging the world into what would be effectively an AI recession. With one exception. Because China's been starved of AI chips, their ability to survive this could be greater than we might think. The shock wouldn't just hit the United States. It would ripple across Europe, Canada, Japan, every economy now dependent on AI-driven growth. Markets would freeze, supply chains would stall, entire sectors would collapse. Seen through that lens, Taiwan's position makes sense. Keeping advanced chip making on the island isn't just an industrial policy. It's a deterrence. And the idea that 40% of that capacity could be casually relocated misunderstands both the geopolitics and the reality of how fragile the global technology economy has become. And that's our show. Once again, we'd like to thank Meter for their support in bringing you this podcast. Meter delivers full-stack networking infrastructure, wired, wireless, and cellular to leading enterprises. Working with their partners, Meter designs, deploys, and manages everything required to get performant, reliable, and secure connectivity in a space. They design the hardware, the firmware, build the software, manage deployments, and even run support. It's a single integrated solution that scales from branch offices, warehouses, and large campuses all the way to data centers. Book a demo at meter.com/HTT. That's meter.com/HTT. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a terrific Tuesday.